I put the notice in the Caldera Springs Courier on a Tuesday in late July, and I did it the way I did most things that summer, without much feeling about it one way or the other. It read, "Rancher, Red Spur Country, 40 years, sound property, seeks capable woman for practical arrangement. No false promises made or expected. Respond in writing to C. Hardin, Box 4, Caldera Springs Post." I showed it to my foreman, a weathered Tejano named Paz Garza, who had ridden with me for 11 years and had the good sense to say almost nothing most of the time. He read it twice, handed it back, and said, "You put no false promises. That'll either scare them all away or bring you the one worth keeping." I told him it would probably scare them all away, and I was mostly at peace with that. The Red Spur was mine, 4,200 acres of southwestern Colorado territory, a main house that needed a woman's hand, and a cattle operation that needed 2 sets of eyes I trusted. My first wife, Clara, had been all of that and more. She died in the 7th year of our marriage, in the spring of our son's birth, and the boy with her. I had buried them together on the East Ridge, under a stand of ponderosa that caught the afternoon light in a way Clara had always liked, and I had spent the 7 years since running the ranch with the kind of focus a man uses when he doesn't want to think about much else. I was not broken. I want to be clear about that. I had not fallen apart or taken to drink or let the Red Spur go to ruin. I had simply put most of what I'd once been into the ground with Clara, and I had made my peace with operating on what remained. The ranch ran well. The cattle were fat. The hands respected me. I slept without trouble most nights and rose before dawn without complaint. What I had was a life, just a narrower one than I'd imagined at 30. The practical notice was Paz's idea originally. He'd raised it twice over the past 2 years, carefully and without pressure, the way he did things. "The house is empty," he said the second time. "The accounts are right and the range is right, but the house is empty, and that matters to a man whether he says so or not." I told him it didn't matter to me. He nodded and let it alone, and 6 months later I sat down at the kitchen table before sunup and wrote the notice out myself, and didn't tell him about it until I'd already sent it. I received 4 responses over the following 2 weeks. The first was from a widow in Pueblo with 6 children, which I admired but could not take on. The second was from a woman in Denver who wanted to know about the acreage value before she said anything else, and I set that one aside without answering. The third was from a preacher's sister in Alamosa, who wrote a very kind letter but mentioned 3 times that she was not suited to hard outdoor work, and the Red Spur in autumn was nothing but hard outdoor work. The 4th letter came on a Thursday, 9 days after the notice ran. It was short. It read, "Mr. Hardin, I am Nora Callum, 28 years, daughter of the late schoolteacher Bernard Callum, currently of Caldera Springs. I am not widowed. I am not fleeing scandal. I am fleeing my father, who is not late but who ought to have been more careful about what kind of woman he raised. I can cook, keep accounts, ride, and work. I do not expect warmth, and I will not manufacture it. If your notice means what it says, write back. N. Callum." I read it 3 times. Then I walked to the barn, saddled my horse, and rode the south fence line for an hour thinking about nothing in particular. When I got back, I wrote her a 2-sentence reply. "Your letter means what it says too. Come on the Thursday stage if you're coming." She came on the Thursday stage. I rode into Caldera Springs myself to meet it. I don't know what I expected, something softer maybe, or something easier to read. What stepped off the stage was a woman of medium height in a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days, with a good square trunk that she managed herself without waiting for the driver, and eyes the color of creek water in autumn that took in the street and the buildings, and then found me standing by the livery post, and did not look away. "Mr. Hardin," she said. "Miss Callum," I said. We shook hands. Hers was dry and firm. She looked me over the way a person looks at a horse they're considering, not rude, just honest. I looked at her the same way and supposed she knew it. "The trunk goes in the wagon," I said. It's a 2-hour ride to the Red Spur. I know, I've lived in Caldera Springs my whole life. I hadn't known that. I felt foolish for not asking and I said so. She said, it's all right. There's a great deal we don't know about each other yet. That's what the arrangement is for. She rode beside me in the wagon without much talk for the first half-hour, watching the country. The Red Spur land begins where the road turns south off the Caldera Creek trace, and you can feel it before you see it. The air changes, opens up, smells of sage and dry grass and the far-off pine country on the ridge. When we crossed onto my range, she sat a little straighter, and I noticed that. It's bigger than I thought, she said. 4,200 acres, I said. Most of it good grazing. How many head? 840, give or take what the tally will show next week. She nodded like she was filing it. And you run it with how many hands? 6, counting Paz Garza, who's the foreman. He's been with me 11 years. Who keeps the accounts? I do. My handwriting is poor and my arithmetic is sound. I'll take the accounts, she said, if that's agreeable. I said it was. We rode the rest of the way in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised me. I had expected awkwardness, or the kind of stiff politeness that comes when two people don't know what to say to each other. There was none of that. She seemed content to watch the land, and I was content to let her. When we pulled into the yard, Paz came out of the barn. He looked at Nora, and then at me with an expression that was perfectly composed and gave away nothing, which was his gift. Miss Callum, I said, this is Paz Garza. Mr. Garza, she said, and shook his hand the same way she'd shaken mine. Paz said, ma'am, and carried her trunk inside without being asked. Later, when she'd gone in to find her room, he came back out to where I stood by the wagon and said, well. Don't, I said. He went back to the barn. The arrangement had 3 terms, which we had settled in the wagon and which I want to set down plainly because they governed everything that followed. First, the ranch work was to be real. She would keep house, manage the kitchen stores and the hands' provisions, take over the account ledgers, and ride with me on fall tally if she was willing. I would not treat her as a guest or a decoration, and she did not want to be treated as one. Second, the ring. For the sake of Caldera Springs and the neighboring ranches, she would be Mrs. Hardin in name. I had a plain gold band that had been Clara's. I had almost put it in the ground with her and had not, though I couldn't have said why at the time. I gave it to Nora in the kitchen on her second morning, setting it on the table between us with the coffee. She looked at it for a moment and then put it on. Neither of us made much of it. Third and most important, no pretense. She had said it in her letter and I had agreed to it before she arrived, and I meant it. We were 2 practical people in a practical arrangement. If it became something else, we would deal with that when it came. If it didn't, we had still served each other well, and there was no shame in that. Those were the terms. I believed in them completely. I was wrong to believe in them quite so completely, but that didn't become clear for a while. The first weeks of August settled into a rhythm I hadn't had in years. I rose before dawn. By the time I came in from the first round of the corrals, there was coffee and a hot meal waiting, which sounds like a small thing and is not a small thing at all when you have been fending for yourself for 7 years. Nora was always up before me. I never figured out how she managed it, and she worked the kitchen with a quietness that didn't feel like timidity but like competence. She knew what she was doing and did it without fuss. The account ledgers took her 3 days to sort out. She sat at the kitchen table with them spread before her and went through 2 years of my record keeping without a word of complaint about my handwriting, though it would have been a fair complaint. On the 4th day she came to find me in the north pasture and showed me a discrepancy in the supply accounts that I had missed for 6 months, a small but steady drain from the feed stores that added up to real money over time. The Garber feed bill doesn't match the delivery logs, she said, holding out the 2 pages side by side. Either someone has been miscounting the deliveries or the Garber clerk has been. I looked at the figures. She was right. How'd you find that? I added them up, she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world, and went back to the house. I talked to the Garber clerk in Caldera Springs the following week and recovered 2 months overpayment. Paz, when he heard about it, said only, "Good woman," and I told him to save it, and he smiled into the middle distance. She had a way with the horses that I hadn't expected. The Red Spur kept a remuda of 14 working horses and 3 mares in foal, and within her first 2 weeks, Nora had learned every one of them by name and habit. Which ones needed a firm hand, which ones needed patience, which ones would try you, and which ones would carry you all day without complaint. She didn't ride like a woman who'd been trained to it as an ornament. She rode like someone who'd figured it out mostly on her own and didn't waste any motion. One morning I came around the corner of the barn to find her standing in the round pen with a young sorrel gelding that had been giving us trouble all summer. A horse with a good heart, but too much energy and not enough trust. She was standing still in the center of the pen with the rope slack in her hand, and the gelding was circling her at a long trot, and she was simply waiting. Not pushing, not pulling, just present. I watched from the fence for 20 minutes. By the end of it, the gelding had stopped and walked up to her shoulder and stood there blowing softly. She put a hand on his neck and said something I couldn't hear. I went on about my business and didn't mention it, but I thought about it on and off for the rest of the day. Late August brought the first real test of the arrangement, and it came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. Her father arrived. His name was Lyle Callum, and he was not late, as Nora had dryly noted in her letter, though looking at him you might have wished he were. He was a heavy-set man of 50-some years, with the bearing of someone who had been the largest person in most rooms he'd occupied, and had never let it go. He came to the Red Spur on a rented horse on a Tuesday afternoon without any notice, and he found me in the yard and introduced himself with a handshake that was meant to be a measurement. "I want to see my daughter," he said. "She's in the house," I said. "I'll let her know you're here." "I don't need you to let her know anything," he said. "I'll go in." I stepped between him and the door, not aggressively, just squarely. "This is my house," I said. "I'll let her know you're here." He looked at me for a moment with the kind of look that's used to working on people. It didn't work on me, and he seemed to recognize that because he stayed where he was. I went in, found Nora at the kitchen table with the ledgers, and said, "Your father's in the yard." She went still. Not afraid, I want to be clear about that. Something more complicated than fear, the kind of stillness that comes when you've been preparing for something for a long time and now it's arrived, and you're deciding whether you're ready. Then she set her pen down and said, "Thank you," and went outside. I stayed near enough to hear, not because I was eavesdropping, but because I didn't trust the man and had no intention of leaving her unwitnessed. Lyle Callum's voice carried easily. "You left without a word," he said. 3 weeks, Nora. I come home and you're gone, and there's a note on the kitchen table like I'm nobody." "The note explained everything," she said. Her voice was steady. "I answered a notice. I made an arrangement. I'm working." "You're not working. You're playing house with a man you don't know on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." "I'm keeping accounts, managing a household of 7 people including 6 ranch hands and learning a cattle operation," she said. "That's work. The kind I've been doing for you for the past 9 years without wages." There was a silence. "You're coming home," he said. "No," she said. "I'm your father." "Yes," she said. "You are, and I love you, and I'm not coming home." Another silence, longer. I could hear the shift in his breathing from where I stood. "This arrangement," he started, "is legal and sanctioned and none of your business," she said. "I'm a grown woman who made a choice. If you'd like to sit down and have coffee, I'll make it. If you've come to argue, I'd rather you saved us both the afternoon." I heard the creak of the porch steps as one of them moved. Then Lyle Callum's voice again, lower and with something in it that might have been grief, or might have been rage, or might have been both. They often share a register in men who have never learned to tell them apart. "He's not your husband," he said. "He's a stranger who put a notice in the paper." "He keeps his word," Nora said. "That's more than some." A long pause. Then the sound of a horse being remounted, and gravel shifting under hooves as the rented horse moved out of the yard. I waited until the sound had died and then went out. Nora was standing on the porch with her arms crossed, watching the road. "He'll be back," she said. "Probably," I said. "I'm sorry he came to your place." "You don't need to apologize for him." She looked at me sidelong. "No," she said. "I don't do I. It wasn't a question." She went back inside. I stood on the porch a moment longer, looking at the road, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, the specific kind of protectiveness that isn't about a ranch or a property, but about a person. I filed it away and went back to work. September came with cooler air and the smell of the turning aspens up on the ridge. And the red spur in September is a different country from the red spur in August, leaner, cleaner, with a light that has more edge to it and a wind that means business. The fall tally was 3 weeks off, and Nora took me up on my offer to ride with us. She had been out on the range in small doses throughout August, getting the feel of the country, and she knew it well enough now to be useful rather than an extra thing to manage. I gave her the gray mare, a steady horse with a long stride, and she took to her without complaint. Paz assigned her the northwest quadrant on the first tally day, with 2 of the younger hands for company, and she came back at noon with a head count and a clean map notation that matched what I had expected within 6 animals. Paz looked at her tally sheet and then at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything, which was the highest compliment the Red Spur operation offered. The nights were cold now, and we sat after supper at the kitchen table, me with the range maps and her with the account books, in the way that 2 people do when they have found a shared silence that isn't empty. I want to be careful about how I say this, because it crept up on me the way things do when you're not watching for them. I didn't notice it happening, which was the point. What I noticed, when I finally noticed anything, was small things. The way she hummed something low and tuneless when she was concentrating. Not a song, just a sound, the way a person breathes into their thinking. I heard it over the account books, and then I stopped hearing it because it was as familiar as anything in the house. The way she stood at the kitchen window in the early morning, before I came in from the corrals, with her coffee cup held in both hands and her eyes on the ridge. Not restless, settled, like someone who has arrived somewhere and knows it. The way she laughed. She didn't laugh often and she didn't laugh for show, but when something genuinely caught her, it came out quick and real, and it changed the whole room. Paz had made her laugh at supper one evening, with something he said about the young Sorrel Gelding's opinion of Mondays, and the sound of it sat in me for the rest of the night like a coal in a banked fire. I noticed also that she had begun calling the red spur horses by short names she'd invented. The gelding was Red, which was not original but was said with a particular fondness that made it mean something. The gray mare was Gracie. The big black I used for rough country she called the Senator, which she offered no explanation for, and which fit him so perfectly that the hands picked it up within a week. And I noticed the grave. She found it on her own in the first week. I hadn't shown it to her, and I hadn't mentioned it, and it wasn't on any path she had reason to take. But the east ridge was visible from the kitchen window, and I suppose she had watched me ride that direction on the mornings I went, and had eventually followed the line with her eyes. She said nothing to me about it for 6 weeks. Then one evening in mid-September she said, over the account books without looking up, "I've been leaving wildflowers on the East Ridge. I hope that's all right." I looked at her. She was still looking at her ledger. "Which kind?" I said after a moment. "Asters mostly. There's a good patch of them on the south face of the slope, some goldenrod." I didn't say anything else, and she didn't either, But something shifted in the room that I can't describe better than that. A weight I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing it moved an inch, maybe two. The night of the difficult calving came in late September, when a cold snap dropped the temperature 40 degrees between sundown and midnight, and one of the foaling mares went into a complicated labor in the barn at 2 in the morning. I had been up already. September cold kept me lighter in my sleep, and I had the lantern lit before Paz knocked. We worked through it together, the mare down on her side in the fresh straw, and an hour in, when it was clear we needed another pair of hands, Paz went to wake one of the hands and came back instead with Nora. She appeared at the barn door in her work clothes with her hair down and a calm expression and said, "Tell me what you need." We needed someone to keep the mare's head steady and speak to her while Paz and I worked, and Nora did it without flinching for 2 hours in a cold barn, talking to that horse in a low voice I couldn't quite make out. Not baby talk, not nonsense, just a quiet, steady sound that kept the mare from panicking through the worst of it. When the foal finally came and the mare lifted her head and began to do what mares do, Nora sat back on her heels in the straw with blood on her hands and straw in her hair, and said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at the foal, a filly, small and dark and already trying her legs, and smiled in a way I hadn't seen before. Something private about it. Paz went to get water. I crouched in the straw and looked at the filly and then at Nora. "She'll be all right," I said, meaning the mare. "I know," she said. I was watching her breathing. She looked at the filly again. "What do you name them?" "Paz usually names the foals." "What will he name this one?" "Ask him," I said. "He'll have something ready." Paz came back with the water and looked at the filly for a long moment. "September," he said. Nora said, "That's right." We stayed until the mare was on her feet and the foal was nursing, and then walked back to the house in the cold pre-dawn, the three of us. At the porch, Paz peeled off to the bunkhouse, and Nora and I went inside. She washed her hands at the basin, while I put water on for coffee. I watched her from across the kitchen, not looking for anything, just watching the way I watched the range in the morning out of habit, and I thought about what she had said to her father. He keeps his word. And I thought about the wildflowers on the East Ridge. And I thought about the quiet in the mornings that had stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like something else. She dried her hands and turned and found me looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. She looked at me for a moment with those creekwater eyes that were very good at reading what was in a room. Then she sat down at the table, and we drank our coffee in the dark before the sun came up, and that was that. Or that was nearly that. The thing about a practical arrangement is that it gives you a place to put feelings you don't know what to do with. You can say, "This is business," and the word business is wide enough to hold a great deal. A man can spend a long time standing behind that word. I had been standing behind it for most of September. By October, I was aware that I was standing behind it, which is different. There's a particular discomfort that comes when you catch yourself using a thing for a purpose it wasn't built for, like using a fence post for a walking stick, and knowing it the whole time. I had convinced myself, when the notice went into the paper, that I was doing a practical thing for practical reasons. I had convinced myself, when Nora arrived, that the arrangement was clear and clean, and would remain so. What I had not accounted for was her. Not in the way of being blindsided by beauty. Nora was handsome in a plain-spoken way, but that wasn't the point. The point was the specific combination of her, the steadiness and the dry wit, and the way she talked about the horses like they had distinct personalities, and she had noticed each one and remembered, and the way she managed the hands with a matter-of-fact respect that had them working better inside of 3 weeks without any of them seeming to know why. The point was that she had walked into the Red Spur with one trunk and no pretense, and had made herself indispensable so quietly and so completely that I couldn't have said exactly when it happened. I rode the South Range one evening in early October with the intention of thinking it through clearly. The aspen on the high slopes had turned by then, gold against the dark pine, and the sky over the mesa was the deep clear blue that only comes in Colorado autumn. It was the kind of country that has a way of making small things feel small and large things feel right. What I thought, riding that range, was, I am in danger of failing the terms I set. The third term, no pretense, meant no false warmth, no manufactured feeling. But what I was carrying by October was not manufactured. It had grown the way the range grass grows, slow and without asking permission, and now it was real, and I had to decide what to do with it. The honest answer was, nothing. The arrangement had been made in good faith and the terms were clear, and adding something she hadn't agreed to, some pressure of feeling she hadn't invited, would be a violation of everything I'd put in that notice about no false promises. She had come for the practical thing. She had said so, plainly, in her letter. She did not expect warmth and she would not manufacture it. But she had said that in July, and it was now October, and a great deal had happened between July and October. I rode back in at dusk and found her on the porch with the account ledger in her lap and a wool blanket around her shoulders against the cold. She looked up when I came in, and I unsaddled and put the senator up, and when I came out of the barn she was still there. "The Garber account is settled for the season," she said. "Good," I said. "The forage reserves look right for the winter." "Good," I said again. A silence. "You've been quiet," she said. "I'm often quiet." "More than usual," she said. Not accusatory, just noting it the way she noted things, like the discrepancy in the feed bills, like the wildflowers on the ridge. I sat down on the porch step. The sky was dark orange over the western mesa, and the air was cold and smelled of pine smoke from the cook stove. I thought about the fence post and the walking stick. "I want to say something," I said, "and I want you to know it doesn't change the terms unless you want it to." She waited. That was her particular gift. She could wait without it becoming pressure. She just was present and the space stayed open. "This is not the arrangement I expected," I said. "What I expected was something useful and decent and without complication. What I've got is that, and something else, and I don't know how to say the something else except plainly." She was looking at me now, the ledger closed in her lap. "I'm not sorry you came," I said. "I've been not sorry in a way I hadn't expected. And I want you to know that I know the difference between that and an obligation, and I have no intention of making it one." I stopped. "That's all I know how to say." The silence after that was long enough that I began to think I had miscalculated badly. Then she said, "When I wrote that letter I meant what I said. I didn't expect warmth. I expected usefulness and a roof and clean terms." "I know," I said. "But I find," she said carefully, "that I have been revising my expectations." I looked at her. "I put flowers on the ridge," she said, "because she was yours and whatever is yours matters to me now. That's not part of any arrangement." She paused. "I don't know what to do with that either, but there it is." The orange had gone out of the sky. The first stars were up. The ranch was quiet in the way it gets on cold October evenings, a deep and lived-in quiet. "All right," I said. "All right," she said. We sat on the porch until the cold drove us in. Lyle Callum came back in the second week of October, and this time he came with a purpose. He had been to see the county clerk, which I had half expected, looking for something wrong with the arrangement, some procedural angle, some legal gap. What he found instead was that the arrangement was sound and the records were proper, and that seemed to have made him angrier rather than less so. He rode in on a Saturday afternoon when I was at the barn and Paz was at the corrals, and Nora was inside with the mending. I heard the horse come into the yard and came out to find him already dismounted and moving toward the house. "Callum," I said. He stopped. He looked worse than he had in August, leaner in the face, with something in his eyes that was less anger now and more a kind of baffled loss. I understood it better than he knew. A man who has held something too tight for too long sometimes can't quite believe it when the grip fails. "I want to talk to Nora," he said. "She's in the house," I said. "I'll ask her if she wants to talk to you." "You'll ask her," he started with the old dismissal in his voice, and then something shifted in him and he stopped. He looked at me differently. "She won't come back," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "She won't." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the main house, at the porch where we'd sat the night before, at the smoke from the cook stove, at the gray mare's head over the corral fence. "She's been here 3 months," he said. "Nearly," I said. "She looks—" He stopped himself again. I waited. "She wrote me a letter," he said, "last week, sent it to Caldera Springs. She said she was well and not to worry, and she said to tell Mrs. Yarnell at the schoolhouse that the autumn box of primers was in the closet behind the geography maps." He looked at me like that meant something. "She remembered," he said, "even now." "Yes," I said, "she would." Another silence, longer. "I wasn't kind to her," he said. "I know that." The words came out stiffly, the way words do when a man isn't in the habit of saying them. "I wasn't. I thought that keeping her close was—" He stopped. "It wasn't kindness." "No," I said, "it wasn't." He looked at me with something that was almost a question, whether I would judge him for it, maybe, or whether I had already. I hadn't. I had simply looked at what I saw, the way Nora had taught me without knowing she'd taught me anything. "She's all right here," he said. "She's more than all right," I said. He nodded once, then he said, "You keep your word." "I try to," I said. He didn't answer that. He stood looking at the house for another moment, and then he remounted, and I thought he would ride out without another word, which would have been fine. Instead he said from the saddle, "The land looks well kept." "It is," I said. He rode out of the yard and down the road toward Caldera Springs, and I watched him go. Nora had come to the door. I didn't know how long she'd been there. She was watching the road. "He'll be all right," I said. "I know," she said. "He's not a bad man. He just never figured out how to hold onto something without squeezing it until it stopped breathing." I said nothing. She looked at me. "Did he say anything?" "He said you looked well," I said. "He remembered you sent the letter about the primers." Something crossed her face. Not softness, something more complicated. The way a person looks when they understand something they can't quite forgive and can't quite not forgive either. "He always remembered things," she said. "That was never the problem." She went back inside. I stood in the yard a moment longer, and then I went to check on September, who was doing well and had begun to follow the gray mare around the corral like a shadow. The first snow came on the 18th of October, light and early, a dusting that was gone by noon but left the peaks white and changed the smell of the air for good. We were on the porch when it started, Nora with her coffee and the senator for company, who had taken to following her to the house in the mornings if the gate was left open, which the hands found highly amusing, and Nora pretended not to notice. I was at the far end of the porch with the range maps. "Early," I said. "The willows turned early too," she said. "That usually means a hard winter." "You've watched the willows." "Since I was a girl," she said. "My mother was from mountain country. She watched the willows." She hadn't mentioned her mother before. I waited. "She died when I was 11, she said. "After that it was just my father and me and the house and his rules. I think he made the rules harder because he was scared of losing another thing." She paused. I understood it. That didn't make it easier to live with. "No," I said, "I imagine not." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The snow was coming down in soft, dry flakes, unhurried. "He was right about one thing," she said. "What's that?" "When he said you're a stranger," she looked at me steadily. "You were in July, you're not now." "I don't know when that changed." "September," I said, "the calving." She considered this. Earlier than that, I think, for me. I looked at her. The second week, she said, when you showed me where the creek crosses the south fence and the way the light came through the cottonwoods, you weren't trying to impress me. You were just showing me the place, like you wanted me to know it. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about it because I hadn't done it deliberately. I had just wanted her to know the place. It is a good place, I said uselessly. Yes, she said, it is. The senator leaned his big black head over the porch rail and nosed at Nora's shoulder. She put a hand up and rubbed his ear without looking at him. Colt, she said, and the use of my name without the handle stopped me in a way it hadn't before. She'd used it since September, but this was different. What do you want this to be? I had thought about that question from every angle for 3 weeks. I had constructed careful answers that preserved the terms and covered the distance, and left her room to stay inside the arrangement if that was what she wanted. I had those answers ready. Instead, what I said was, I want it to be what it already is. I want to stop calling it an arrangement. She looked at me for a long time. The snow came down slow and steady. That would require, she said, that I stay, not because the terms say so, because I want to. Yes, I said. And you're asking me. I'm asking you, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she said, I put wildflowers on your wife's grave because I love this place, because I love what you built here and what she was part of. That's not something I would do for a business arrangement. I didn't answer that. There wasn't a better answer than what she just said. I'll stay, she said, not because the terms say so. No, I said, not because the terms say so. The senator blew warm air onto her shoulder. The snow caught in the porch railing and held. There are things I know now about love that I didn't know at 30, and one of them is this. It doesn't look the same the second time. The first time with Clara, who was warmth and light and the best of my early years, it was a fire, quick and consuming and sure of itself from the first. The second time was slower. It had a different weight. It was built from account ledgers and a barn in the cold, and a woman telling an old horse things I couldn't hear, and it was no less real for any of that. I would say it was more real, but I don't know how to measure such a thing, and I'm not sure it matters. What I know is that Nora Callum walked into the red spur with one trunk and clear eyes, and no expectation of warmth. And she built something out of plain work and plain talk that I had stopped believing was possible. We married properly in Caldera Springs in early November, at the county clerk's office with Paz and 2 of the hands as witnesses. And Nora wore the same dark blue dress she'd stepped off the stage in and looked like herself, which was the only way she ever looked. Paz had brought autumn flowers from the south slope, late asters, some dried goldenrod, and he gave them to her without ceremony, and she held them through the whole proceeding. The clerk asked if we were entering this voluntarily and without coercion. I said yes. Nora said yes, we meant it. Afterward we walked back to the livery where the wagon was waiting, and the air was cold, and the aspens were bare, and the mountains south of Caldera Springs had 2 feet of snow on their high shoulders. Husband, she said experimentally, like she was finding where the word sat. Wife, I said. She looked at me with those Creekwater eyes and said, You still owe me a summer's back wages on the account books. I said I'd settle up when we got home. She said that would do. Lyle Callum came to the red spur the following spring, in April, when the range was greening and September was on her feet properly and learning to be a horse in the world. He came of his own accord, no warning, and he brought a jar of his sister's putting up honey as if he had decided that was the right thing, and he was going to do it regardless of how it went. He stayed for supper. Paz sat at the table and the 2 older hands, and everyone talked about the winter range and the prospects for the calving season, and Lyle Callum listened more than he talked, which was not his habit, and I watched him watch Nora move through the kitchen and the table and the room with the ease of someone who has been exactly where they are for a long time. After supper, when the hands had gone and Paz had made himself scarce with the quiet gift he had for doing that, Lyle sat at the table with his coffee, and I sat at the other end, and Nora moved between us, and after a time he said to her, "You're happy." She looked at him from the stove. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He turned his coffee cup. He looked like a man working out something he had put off working out, the way you leave a fence repair until you can't leave it any longer. "I held on too long," he said. Nora said yes. "I was afraid of," he stopped, tried again. "After your mother I was afraid of everything going, and instead you drove it off," she said, not harshly, just plainly the way she always said things. "Yes," he said. He looked at me across the table, and this time there was nothing measuring about it. Just a man at the end of something difficult, arriving on the other side of it. "You have a good place here," he said. "Yes," I said, "we do." He left before dark, riding back toward Caldera Springs in the long April evening with the honey jar gone, and some of the weight he'd carried in gone with it. Nora stood on the porch and watched him go. I stood beside her. "He'll come back," she said. "I know," I said. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like him to know this place the way I know it." I put my hand over hers on the porch rail. She turned hers and held it. The south meadow was green. September was at the corral fence with the gray mare. The asters would come up in the East Ridge patch in another month, and I already knew who would pick them. That's how it was, that's how it is. A practical man put a practical notice in a paper because his house was empty, and a clear-eyed woman answered it because she was ready to stop being held. And what happened between July and April was not anything either of us had the words for in advance. We had the words for it now. We just didn't need to say them very often. The Red Spur is a different country in spring.